Shattered 4 bags and stumbled steps were her trademarks, the little disasters that trailed in her wake, like exhaust fumes from a broken-down car. Nurse Alara Vance was a ghost in the hallowed, sterile halls of Metropolitan General, a whisper of apologies and the quiet clatter of dropped instruments. But the clumsiness, the meekness, the absolute and profound invisibility she had so meticulously crafted was a lie. It was a shield, a fortress built of perceived incompetence, and tonight the walls were about to be violently, catastrophically torn down. Tonight, the ghost was about to show the world why she had earned her name not in the quiet corridors of healing, but in the deafening kill zones of forgotten wars. The emergency department of Metropolitan General Hospital was not a place of quiet healing. It was a perpetual, high-stakes battleground where the enemy was time itself. It existed in a toxic soup of competing urgencies, a suffocating miasma of antiseptic, stale coffee, bleach, and the faint metallic tang of human fear. The air, thick and heavy, carried the relentless symphony of suffering. The rhythmic, anxious beep of a cardiac monitor, the sharp, hysterical squeak of a gurney wheel fighting a losing war against friction, the low, guttural moans of pain that leaked from behind thin privacy curtains, and the strained, professional calm of voices trying desperately to impose order on absolute chaos. The crushing weight of it all was a physical presence, a pressure that settled on the shoulders of every nurse, doctor, and technician who walked these polished linoleum floors. A floor that reflected the strobing, unyielding white lights above with a cold, indifferent sheen. It was a place designed for efficiency, yet it always felt on the ragged edge of a complete and total system failure. A sterile, white and chrome ecosystem teeming with unseen, microscopic predators and the very visible, traumatic fallout of human fragility. In the center of this meticulously managed chaos, Alara Vance moved like a phantom, a study in self-effacement. She was the bottom of the food chain, the nurse assigned the tasks no one else wanted. Today, it was stalking the trauma bays, her movements deliberately hesitant, her shoulders perpetually slumped in a posture of apology for the very space she occupied. She fumbled with a box of sterile saline bags, one slipping through her fingers and hitting the floor with a dull, pathetic slap. The sound was insignificant against the ER's cacophony, but it was loud enough to draw the one pair of eyes she spent every shift trying to avoid. Her public persona was a carefully constructed armor of meekness, a clumsy, silent, and utterly subservient shell designed to make her forgettable. She was Butterfingers Vance, a running joke among the residents, a mild annoyance to the senior staff. This persona was her sanctuary, the quiet life she had bled for, a penance paid in daily, low-grade humiliations. Inside, behind the downcast eyes and the mumbled apologies, a different entity resided, a still, silent predator resting in a cage of her own design, waiting for a threat that, she prayed, would never come. "Vance!" The voice was not a request for attention. It was an artillery strike of pure, unadulterated arrogance, a sound designed to shatter nerves and assert dominance. Director Adrian Thorne stood at the main nursing station, a monument to tailored scrubs and self-importance. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his face a mask of patrician disdain. He didn't manage the ER. He reigned over it, a petty king obsessed with the rigid hierarchy he had built. His primary motivation, a pathological insecurity so profound it radiated from him like heat, was masked by a relentless, cruel arrogance. He thrived on the fear of his subordinates, and Alara Vance was his favorite target, the perfect canvas upon which to paint his superiority. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the dropped saline bag. "Is it truly so difficult to move a simple box from the storeroom to the cart without redecorating my floor? Or is that particular skill set above your pay grade?" His words were laced with a mocking, passive-aggressive poison, delivered loudly enough for half the staff to hear. He didn't want a response. He wanted an audience for his power. A few of the younger nurses snickered, quickly hiding their smiles behind clipboards. Alara felt the familiar, cold burn of shame, a feeling she deliberately cultivated and held close. It was part of the disguise. She bent down, her movements intentionally awkward, to retrieve the bag. "My apologies, Director Thorne. It won't happen again." Her voice was a whisper, barely audible, the voice of a mouse hoping the hawk would fly on. Thorne sniffed, a sound of profound disgust. "See that it doesn't. This is an elite medical facility, not a remedial training center for the perpetually incompetent." He turned, his attention already elsewhere, the humiliation delivered, his ego momentarily sated. As he swept away, a younger, kind-eyed nurse named Lena Petrova quietly knelt beside Alara, her face a mixture of pity and worry. She placed a gentle hand on Alara's arm. "Don't listen to him," Lena murmured, her voice a small beacon of warmth in the sterile cold. "He's a monster to everyone." Alara gave a weak, watery smile, a flawless performance of gratitude. "Thank you, Lena." She finished her task, the silent, invisible nurse once more, her internal shields perfectly in place, the dormant volcano of her true self showing no signs of life. She just needed to make it to the end of her shift, to clock out and return to the quiet emptiness of her apartment, where the only thing she had to fight were the ghosts of her past. The first sign of the impending catastrophe was not a sound, but a vibration. A low, distant roar that hummed through the concrete foundation of the hospital, a deep, guttural tremor that felt less like an event and more like a geological shift. Then came the sirens. Not one or two, but a tidal wave of them, a chaotic, multi-layered scream that grew from a distant wail to a deafening, all-consuming shriek that seemed to tear the very fabric of the city air. Every head in the ER snapped up. The usual rhythm of controlled crisis was shattered. This was something different. This was wrong. A charge nurse, her face pale, hung up the red emergency phone at the main desk, her hand trembling slightly. "Dispatch reports a multi-vehicle pileup on the I-95 overpass," she announced, her voice straining to remain steady over the rising tide of sirens. "Chain reaction. A fuel tanker was involved. They're saying it's catastrophic. Mass casualties. They're rerouting everyone here. We're the primary trauma center." The words hung in the air for a fraction of a second before the ER exploded into a frenzy of controlled preparation. The organized chaos of a normal Tuesday was instantly replaced by the frantic, high-stakes ballet of a mass casualty incident protocol. Carts were slammed into place, supplies were ripped from shelves, and doctors began barking orders, their voices tight with adrenaline. The massive bay doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss, ready to receive the first wave of the wounded and the dying. The incident flooded the environment, a relentless tsunami of human suffering that promised to overwhelm their meticulously organized defenses. Director Thorne strode into the center of the ER, his face a mask of severe authority. He was in his element, not in the trenches of medicine, but in the administration of it. "All right, people, listen up," he boomed, attempting to project an image of absolute control. "Standard Moscow protocols are in effect. I want full triage set up at the ambulance bay. Green tags to the waiting room, yellows to Zone B, reds straight to trauma bays 1 through 4. I will be coordinating from the central station. No cowboys, no heroes. We stick to the book." His response was textbook, superficial, based on a flowchart he had likely memorized for a board certification exam. He was a manager, not a leader. And in the face of a true storm, the distinction was about to become terrifyingly, fatally clear. The first wave hit like an artillery barrage, a stream of ambulances, their lights painting the bay in strobing flashes of red and white, disgorged their broken cargo. Paramedics rushed in, their faces grim, shouting out vitals and mechanisms of injury. The air became thick with the smell of burnt plastic, gasoline, and blood. It was a scene of relentless, unyielding horror. A man with a piece of rebar protruding from his chest, a woman with catastrophic burns screaming in agony, a child unnervingly silent, his small body strapped to a backboard. Thorne stood at his command post, pointing and directing like a conductor leading a disastrous symphony. He was too far removed from the blood and the gore, his focus on the logistics, the paperwork, the efficient processing of bodies. He barked at a junior resident who was spending too long on a yellow-tagged patient. "He's stable enough. Move on. We have Reds waiting. Efficiency, doctor. Efficiency. He completely missed the subtle but critical detail the resident was worried about. The patient's slightly distended abdomen, a sign of a potential slow internal bleed that would soon become a fatal hemorrhage. Thorne's obsession with protocol over patient care was already planting the seeds of his own downfall. Amidst the escalating bedlam, Alara continued her meek charade, her movements still deliberately clumsy as she ferried supplies and cleaned up discarded, blood-soaked gauze. But inside, something ancient and deeply ingrained had begun to stir. The sounds, the smells, the sheer overwhelming pressure of the maskell. It was a sensory echo of a past she fought daily to suppress. The high-pitched whine of a failing monitor was the scream of a jet engine. The sharp smell of cauterized flesh was a ghost from a bombed-out building in a forgotten desert. She saw the chaos not as a civilian nurse, but through the cold, calculating lens of a combat medic. She saw the tactical flaws in Thorne's rigid system, the inefficiencies, the wasted movements. She saw the young resident's correct instincts being overruled by bureaucratic arrogance. A quiet, cold anger began to smolder deep within her, a pilot light in the dormant engine of her true self. She kept her head down, her hands moving, her mask of incompetence firmly in place. It wasn't her fight. Not anymore. She had made a promise to herself. She was just Nurse Vance. She was nobody. The crisis escalated with the arrival of a single, black, unmarked SUV that sliced through the ambulance traffic with aggressive, professional precision. It wasn't part of the Moscow response. It screamed of government, of secrets, of a level of importance that superseded the surrounding civilian disaster. Two men in dark suits, their faces like granite, leaped out and opened the rear door. A third, his jacket stained with a rapidly spreading patch of dark blood, helped them lift a man from the vehicle. This was not a car crash victim. This was a targeted attack. The man on the gurney was Senator Marcus Thorne, a prominent political figure and, by a cruel twist of fate, the estranged older brother of the very man in charge of the ER. The senator was pale, his breathing shallow, a single, neat, but devastating gunshot wound high on his chest. Director Thorne's face went white, the color draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. The sight of his powerful brother, broken and bleeding, shattered his composure. This was no longer a faceless mass casualty event. It was personal, a direct threat to his world, his status, his name. Thorne immediately abandoned his command post, shoving a younger doctor out of the way to take personal charge of his brother's care. "Get him to Trauma 1, now!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and rage. "I want a full trauma panel, X-ray. Get Dr. Carter in here for a surgical consult. Move, you incompetent fools! Move!" His arrogance had now curdled into pure, blind panic. He began barking a series of rapid-fire, contradictory orders, his medical judgment completely clouded by his emotional meltdown. He focused entirely on the obvious, catastrophic gunshot wound, the gaping, bleeding hole in his brother's chest. He screamed for chest tubes, for massive transfusions, for all the standard, aggressive treatments for a thoracic penetrating trauma. He was so fixated on the visible wound that he failed to notice the almost imperceptible signs that something else was terribly wrong. The senator's skin had a faint, almost bluish tint around the lips. There was a subtle, unnatural rigidity in his limbs. Most telling of all, the edges of the entry wound weren't just bleeding, they were necrotizing, turning a sickly, dark gray at a rate that defied normal pathophysiology. Thorne, in his panic-fueled incompetence, missed it all. He was treating the bullet, not the poison it carried. His actions weren't just futile, they were actively accelerating his brother's death. Alara was restocking a nearby cart when they wheeled the senator past. Her eyes, trained by years of battlefield medicine where conventional wounds were often the least of her worries, caught the details Thorne had missed in a single, ice-cold glance. The cyanosis, the muscle fasciculations under the skin, the necrotic tissue at the wound margin. It wasn't just a gunshot. The bullet had been tipped with a fast-acting neurotoxin, a specialized compound designed to simulate cardiac arrest and make a murder look like a failed medical intervention. She knew the chemical signature. She had seen it once before, in a dusty village on the other side of the world, used by an assassination squad they had been hunting. Her blood ran cold. Thorne's protocol, pumping the senator full of fluids and medications for shock, would circulate the poison faster, burning out his nervous system within minutes. He would be dead, and everyone would blame the bullet. That was the moment. The click. The deafening crack of a cage shattering. The carefully constructed persona of Butterfingers Vance, the meek apologies, the downcast eyes, the deliberate clumsiness, evaporated in a nanosecond. It was incinerated by a profound, unyielding certainty. Her inaction, her selfish desire for a quiet life, was about to let a man die. The ghosts of the soldiers she couldn't save screamed in her memory, a chorus of condemnation. She would not add another voice to that choir. Not today. A tectonic shift occurred within her. The slumped, apologetic posture straightened into a rigid military brace. Her head lifted, her eyes, once dull and avoidant, now burned with a chilling, predatory intensity. The timid mouse was gone. In its place stood an apex predator, and the sterile, chaotic ER had just become her hunting ground. Her movements, once fumbling, became fluid, seamless, and lethally efficient. The statue had cracked, and the warrior within was unleashed. Her voice, when it came, was unrecognizable. The mousy whisper was gone, replaced by a low, calm, and absolute command that cut through Thorne's hysterical shrieking like a scalpel through flesh. Stop. It was a single word, delivered with the flat, unshakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question in matters of life and death. You're killing him. Thorne spun around, his face contorted in a mask of apoplectic rage. What did you say to me, you useless girl? He didn't even seem to recognize her at first, but Alara was already moving. She aggressively shoved a crash cart laden with useless equipment out of her way, the clang of metal on metal echoing her newfound resolve. She grabbed a pair of sterile gloves from a dispenser and snapped them on with a flawless, practiced efficiency that belied years of feigned incompetence. I said, she repeated, her voice dropping even lower, colder. You are killing him. You're circulating the toxin. She didn't wait for his permission. She moved to the head of the gurney, her presence so commanding that the other nurses and doctors instinctively took a step back, their brains struggling to reconcile the clumsy girl from 5 minutes ago with the unyielding force of nature now standing before them. Get away from my brother, Thorne screamed, lunging for her. Alara didn't even look at him. With a speed that was almost too fast to see, she shot out a hand, not to strike him, but to intercept his wrist. Her grip was like iron. She stopped his forward momentum dead, her fingers digging into the pressure points with a practiced, painful precision. Thorne gasped, his eyes wide with shock and pain. She held him there for a beat, her cold eyes finally locking onto his. Get out of my way. She enunciated each word with a quiet, terrifying finality. She released him, shoving him back a step. He stumbled, utterly stunned into silence. Alara turned back to the patient, her focus absolute. Lena, she snapped, her voice a whip crack of command. The young nurse, her face a mask of bewildered awe, jumped. Yes? I need atropine and pralidoxime chloride. 10 amps of each. Now. And get me a central line kit and an intubation tray. Move! Her orders were not suggestions. They were law. Lena and another nurse scrambled to obey, their movements galvanized by her sheer force of will. Alara began working on the senator, her hands moving with a blinding, flawless precision. She was no longer a nurse. She was an artist, and her medium was the ragged edge between life and death. She was using improvised, unconventional field techniques, things not found in any civilian medical textbook, to counteract a poison that, officially, didn't exist. She was saving his life, and in doing so, she was utterly destroying her own. Dr. Ben Carter, the new head of trauma surgery and a former Army Ranger, had been responding to Thorne's frantic page. He arrived at the entrance to Trauma Bay 1 just in time to witness the entire, unbelievable transformation. He saw the meek nurse he'd barely noticed before physically halt the chief of emergency medicine. He heard the impossible diagnosis of a specialized neurotoxin, and he watched, with a growing sense of profound professional shock, as her hands moved with the kind of supernatural confidence and skill he had only ever seen in the most elite Special Forces medics operating under fire. She wasn't just following a procedure. She was innovating, adapting, her every action brutally efficient and stripped of any wasted motion. He recognized the economy of movement, the cold calm under catastrophic pressure. It was the mark of a warrior, a fellow veteran forged in the same crucible of chaos and violence. He didn't know who this woman was, but he knew, with an absolute certainty that chilled him to the bone, that she was no ordinary nurse. Director Thorne, recovering from the shock of being physically manhandled, felt his terror and confusion curdle back into incandescent rage. The public humiliation, the utter defiance of his authority by the lowest-ranking nurse in his department, was an unforgivable sin. The fact that she might be right, that his brother's life hung in the balance of her mysterious actions, was irrelevant. His ego had suffered a mortal wound, and it demanded retribution. "Security!" he bellowed, his voice raw with fury, his face a blotchy, apoplectic red. "Security to Trauma 1, now! I want this woman arrested. She's insane. She's assaulting staff and endangering a patient. Get her out of my hospital." He pointed a trembling finger at Alara, who completely ignored him, her entire being focused on the delicate, life-saving procedure she was performing on the senator. "Did you hear me?" Thorne shrieked at the other medical staff, who were frozen in a state of stunned inaction. "I am firing you. You are finished in this city, Vance. You will never work as a nurse again." Two hospital security guards, burly men more accustomed to dealing with drunkards and distraught family members than insubordinate nurses, arrived, their expressions uncertain. They saw the director of the ER screaming, and they saw a nurse working intently on a critical patient. "Sir?" one of them asked, confused. "Remove her," Thorne commanded. "Use force if you have to." The guards exchanged a hesitant look. They started to move forward, their hands reaching for Alara. It was at that precise, volatile moment that the secondary threat materialized. The two men in suits who had brought the senator in, and who had been quietly observing from the corner of the trauma bay, suddenly moved. They were not Secret Service. They were assassins, sent to confirm the kill. Realizing their poison had been identified and was being countered, they switched to Plan B. With a chillingly synchronized grace, both men produced suppressed pistols from beneath their jackets. The quiet, efficient pops of the weapons were almost lost in the din of the ER, but to Alara, they were as loud as cannon fire. The world slowed to a crawl. Alara's combat-honed senses took over completely. Before the first security guard had even registered the threat, she was in motion. She didn't scream or flinch. She reacted. In a single fluid movement, she kicked the base of the gurney she was working on, sending it rolling hard into the two guards and Dr. Carter, shoving them out of the immediate line of fire. Simultaneously, she grabbed the heaviest object within reach, a stainless steel instrument tray, and flung it like a discus at the closest assassin. The heavy metal tray caught him square in the face, with a sickening crunch of cartilage and bone. He staggered back, his nose shattered, his aim ruined. The second assassin fired, the suppressed round whispering past Alara's ear and embedding itself in the wall behind her with a puff of drywall dust. There was no time for thought, only for ruthless, violent action. She vaulted over a supply cart, closing the distance to the second shooter with the predatory grace of a jungle cat. He tried to bring his weapon back on target, but she was too fast. She slammed into him, driving the heel of her hand up under his chin, snapping his head back violently. His finger spasmed on the trigger, sending another round harmlessly into the ceiling. As he stumbled, she disarmed him with a brutal, practiced wrist lock that elicited a sharp cry of pain. She didn't stop there. She drove her knee aggressively into his solar plexus, doubling him over, then brought the captured pistol down in a vicious, disabling blow to the back of his neck. He collapsed to the linoleum floor, unconscious. The entire, brutal ballet of violence had taken less than 5 seconds. The ER was plunged into a shocked, deafening silence, broken only by the whimpering of the first assassin, who was clutching his ruined face, and the steady, rhythmic beep of the senator's heart monitor, which, thanks to Alara's intervention, was now strong and stable. Alara stood between the neutralized threats and the patient, the captured pistol held in a perfect two-handed combat grip, its muzzle pointed at the floor, her body positioned to shield the senator. Her breath was steady. Her eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the chaotic room for any further threats. Dr. Carter, untangling himself from the gurney, stared at her, his mouth agape. The swift, brutal, and utterly flawless efficiency of her actions was not just impressive, it was terrifying. It was the muscle memory of a Tier 1 operator. He had seen that exact takedown before, but only in training simulations with Delta Force. Director Thorne, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending terror, had shrunk back against a wall, his shrieking rage replaced by a whimpering, pathetic fear. The woman he had been about to have thrown out had just dismantled two professional killers as if they were unruly toddlers. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted. It had been tectonically, irrevocably shattered. Before anyone could process the impossible scene, the decorated director of emergency medicine cowering in a corner, the hospital's most incompetent nurse standing over two unconscious assassins, holding a pistol like a seasoned professional, the main ambulance bay doors were thrown open with a violent, percussive bang. It wasn't more assassins. It was a phalanx of figures clad in black tactical gear, their movements precise, their weapons held at a low ready. They flowed into the ER like a dark tide, securing the perimeter with a silent, terrifying efficiency that made the hospital security guards look like children playing dress-up. They were SEALs. At their head was a man who radiated an aura of absolute, unquestionable authority. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face a granite landscape carved by decades of command. He wore the uniform of a rear admiral in the United States Navy, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, swept across the tableau of chaos, taking in the neutralized assassins, the stabilized senator on the gurney, and finally, settling on the lone woman standing guard. The admiral ignored the cowering Director Thorne. He paid no mind to the stunned doctors and nurses. His entire focus narrowed onto Alara. A flicker of profound relief crossed his hardened features. He took a step forward, his voice, deep and resonant, booming across the now dead-silent emergency room, a voice that had commanded fleets and sent men into the darkest corners of the world. He did not address her as Nurse Vance. He did not even use her real name. He spoke a single word, a name that was both a legend and a ghost in the circles he moved in. Ghost. The name hung in the air, electric and heavy with unspoken history. "Stand down," he commanded, his tone firm but gentle. "We have it from here." Alara's posture, which had been coiled with lethal tension, relaxed almost imperceptibly. She deliberately lowered the pistol, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber in a single, smooth motion, and placed the now safe weapon on a nearby counter. She had handed over the watch. Her fight was over. Admiral Marcus Sterling strode forward, his black combat boots making no sound on the polished floor. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of profound respect and paternal affection. Then, he turned to face the bewildered, terrified audience of medical professionals. His gaze was glacial, sweeping over them before finally landing, with the force of a physical blow, on the pathetic, trembling form of Director Adrian Thorne. "For those of you who are confused," the Admiral began, his voice dripping with icy contempt, "allow me to introduce you to the woman who just saved all of your lives." He gestured to Alara. "This is not Nurse Vance. This is Chief Petty Officer Alara Vance of the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Her call sign is Ghost. She is, without question, the single finest combat medic this nation has ever produced." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, letting the shock ripple through the room. The whispers started, a wave of disbelief and dawning comprehension. Ghost. Team 6. The legends were real. The Admiral's voice dropped, becoming even more dangerous. "She is the recipient of the Navy Cross for her actions during Operation Nightfall, 2 silver stars for valor under extreme fire, and 4 bronze stars. She has personally saved the lives of over 30 special operators in conditions that would make this," he waved a dismissive hand at the chaotic ER, "look like a quiet afternoon nap. She is a hero in the truest sense of the word." He then turned his full, unblinking, wrathful attention back to Director Thorne. "And you," he snarled, the word a venomous epithet. "You called her incompetent. You tried to have her fired while she was saving your own brother's life." The public shaming was brutal, a verbal vivisection performed in front of Thorne's entire staff. He then looked at the stabilized senator and back to the stunned medical team. His next words were an edict, an unbreakable command. "Effective immediately, Chief Petty Officer Vance is in absolute command of Senator Thorne's security and ongoing medical care. Her authority on this matter supersedes everyone in this hospital, including this institution's so-called director. Every single one of you will follow her orders without question or hesitation. Is that understood?" A chorus of stunned, mumbled "yes, sirs" answered him. Alara had not just been vindicated, she had been deified. The ghost had been given a crown. Admiral Sterling's vindication of Alara was merely the prelude to the main event, the reckoning. His team had not just been a reactionary force, they had been hunting. The assassination attempt on Senator Thorne was the culmination of a long and delicate intelligence operation. As two of his SEALs efficiently and professionally zip-tied the unconscious assassins, another approached the Admiral and handed him a small, encrypted audio recorder. Sterling took it, his expression hardening further. He turned his attention back to Director Adrian Thorne, who was now attempting to make himself as small as possible, a feat of physical contraction born of pure, abject terror. "You see, Director," Sterling said, his voice deceptively calm. "We've been aware for some time that there was a leak in the Senator's security detail. A highly placed asset with access and opportunity. Someone who could ensure that if an attempt on his life was made, it would succeed, and could be easily covered up by the chaos of a place like, say, a major hospital during a mass casualty event." He held up the small recorder. "This device contains a recording of a conversation that took place less than an hour ago. It's between our now unconscious friend over there," he nodded towards one of the captured assassins, "and his paymaster." The paymaster was confirming that he would misdiagnose the Senator's injuries, administer drugs that would accelerate the effects of the poison, and officially declare his time of death within the hour, citing complications from his gunshot wound. A tidy, tragic, and utterly false narrative. The Admiral took a deliberate step closer to Thorne, who began to shake uncontrollably. The asset was promised a substantial sum of money, wired to an offshore account, for his cooperation. He was motivated by greed and, from what I can gather, a pathetic, lifelong jealousy of his far more successful and honorable older brother. Every word was a hammer blow, systematically destroying the last vestiges of Thorne's authority and reputation. The public exposure was absolute, a spotlight of truth in the sterile white room, revealing the rot and corruption hiding beneath the tailored scrubs and arrogant bluster. "It's a lie!" Thorne finally squeaked, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "A conspiracy! I would never! He's my brother!" The Admiral's face was a mask of utter contempt. "Save it." He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod to two of his SEALs. They moved with silent, predatory speed, flanking the now sobbing director. "Director Adrian Thorne," the Admiral declared, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, treason, and accepting bribes from a hostile foreign power. You have the right to remain silent." The professional and legal destruction was complete. As the SEALs pulled Thorne's hands behind his back and cinched the zip ties around his wrists, his psychological collapse became total. The arrogant, commanding figure dissolved into a blubbering, weeping mess. He sobbed uncontrollably, babbling incoherent denials and pleas as he was unceremoniously hauled to his feet and frog-marched out of the emergency room he once ruled, led away in ultimate, public disgrace in front of the very people he had spent years terrorizing. His downfall was not just a removal from power, it was an annihilation of his entire identity, a catastrophic implosion of a fragile ego built on a foundation of lies. In the aftermath of the chaos, a strange, almost reverent calm settled over the ER. The Moscow victims were still being treated, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The staff moved with a renewed sense of purpose, their eyes constantly flicking towards Alara with a mixture of awe, shame, and profound respect. She was no longer Butterfingers Vance. She was a living legend, a quiet guardian who had walked among them unseen. After ensuring Senator Thorne was stabilized and moved to a secure room in the ICU, Alara found herself standing with Admiral Sterling in a quiet alcove, the noise of the ER a distant hum. The Admiral's stern demeanor had softened. He looked at her not as a subordinate, but as a cherished comrade, a daughter forged in fire. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I almost didn't recognize you. The whole clumsy, quiet routine. You were good. Too good." Alara just shrugged, the simple gesture carrying the weight of years of self-imposed exile. "I just wanted some quiet, Marcus," she said, using his first name for the first time in years. "I was tired of the noise." "The world is a noisy place, Ghost," he replied gently, "and it needs people like you to make sense of it. It needs leaders." He paused, his expression turning serious. "The president has been briefed on tonight's events. He's authorized the creation of a new unit, a national-level, rapid deployment, medical and tactical response team. Something that can operate domestically with the speed and lethality of a team like yours, but with a primary focus on crisis medicine. He wants you to build it. He wants you to lead it. Name your budget, pick your team. It's yours." It was the ultimate offer, a position of immense power and responsibility, a formal recognition from the highest levels of government of her true and unparalleled value. It was a chance to step out of the shadows for good, to wear a title that matched her capabilities. It was everything she should have wanted. Alara looked past the Admiral, her gaze settling on the controlled chaos of the ER. She saw Lena Petrova, the kind young nurse, competently and confidently dressing a patient's wounds, her movements now imbued with a new sense of pride. She saw Dr. Ben Carter, the ranger surgeon, directing the trauma teams with a calm authority, occasionally glancing over at her with a look of shared, unspoken understanding. This place, this floor, was a battlefield of a different kind. The enemy wasn't a foreign soldier. It was pain, injury, and despair. And the soldiers were these nurses and doctors, fighting a relentless, thankless war, day in and day out. She had come here to hide, to be a ghost in a different kind of war, but she had found something else, a purpose, a home. She turned back to the Admiral, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that night, perhaps for the first time in years. "With all due respect, Admiral," she said, her voice quiet but firm, filled with a newfound peace, "I think my place is here." Sterling raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Here? As a nurse? After all this?" Alara shook her head. "Not as a nurse, and not as a ghost. Not anymore." Her eyes shone with a new clarity. She wasn't choosing to hide again. She was choosing to lead, but on her own terms. This hospital needs a new director of emergency medicine, one who understands what it's like on the floor, one who values competence over titles and people over protocol. "I'm going to build something here, Marcus. A team. The best damn trauma response unit this country has ever seen, right here in this ER." It was an audacious declaration, a rejection of a prestigious title in favor of hands-on, meaningful work. She was choosing purpose over status, integrating her past skills not in a clandestine government unit, but in the bright, chaotic, and very public arena of a city hospital. She was finally, truly, coming home. The Admiral studied her for a long moment, and then a slow, broad smile spread across his face. He saw the truth in her decision. She wasn't retreating. She was advancing on a new front. He clapped her on the shoulder again, this time with a resounding thud of approval. "Then I guess Metropolitan General is about to become the safest and most dangerous hospital in the world," he said with a low chuckle. "Just say the word, Chief. Anything you need, any resource, any person, you'll have it." He gave her a final, proud nod, and then turned to leave, his team falling into formation behind him, melting back into the night as quickly and silently as they had arrived. Alara watched them go, a sense of profound peace settling over her. The war inside was finally over. The two halves of her life, the warrior and the healer, were no longer in conflict. They were one. Later, as the adrenaline began to fade, and the ER returned to a semblance of its normal, chaotic rhythm, Dr. Carter approached her. He held out 2 cups of notoriously bad vending machine coffee. She took one, her fingers brushing his. The look in his eyes was one of deep, abiding respect, the silent acknowledgement of a shared tribe. "So," he said, a small, dark, humorous smile playing on his lips as he leaned against the wall beside her. "Butterfingers Vance, huh?" Alara took a sip of the bitter coffee and allowed herself a real, unforced smile. "Yeah," she said softly. "Butterfingers." The story of this night would become a legend in the halls of Metropolitan General, a stark and powerful reminder that the quietest people often carry the loudest histories, that true strength has no need for arrogance, and that competence, forged in the unforgiving crucible of reality, will always, inevitably, triumph over the hollow bluster of those who merely play at power. The most dangerous predators, after all, are the ones you never see coming, the ones who have mastered the art of being invisible, right up until the moment they decide not to be.